As promised, Dr. Matthew Peterson is Vice President of Education for the Claremont Institute. He is a writer and a contributor to many social media platforms and has thought deeply and longly, if that's a word, about the issues we're going to talk about, big tech banding together against us and what we're going to do about it. Matt, thanks for joining me on the show. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
A little bit more about...
Sounds great.
Yeah. I've never been to Germany. I've been to Italy. I've been to France. Been to England and Ireland, but Germany's always kind of fascinated me because, you know what, when I hear a German accent, I just think of Colonel Klink from Hogan's Heroes. But Germany's a very Catholic place and pivotal for the evangelization of Europe and hence the West, so we're really looking forward to it. A little bit about you and the Claremont Institute. What's the mission, what was the founding, and what's your current MO?
Sure. So currently I'm a Vice President of Education at the Claremont Institute and editor of our new publication, The American Mind. And the Claremont Institute, for those who don't know, has been around for 40 years. We just celebrated our 40th anniversary gala with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in L.A. And for 40 years, it writes, it teaches, and it litigates. So it's founded by a bunch of graduate students who study political science and want to get active in American political life and bring the arguments and principles of the American founding to bear on our contemporary problems. And to do that, we litigate in the courts. John Eastman at the Center for Constitutional Jurisprudence does a fantastic job of this, defending religious liberty, writing amicus briefs for the Supreme Court. He's been very successful over that time. And then we also write. We write a lot. The Claremont Review of Books is our signature publication, which is getting a lot of attention right now for people on all sides of the political spectrum who are trying to understand what's going on in this wild political time we find ourselves in. I'm the founding editor of AmericanMind.org. AmericanMind.org is there's content more than 4 times a year. The Claremont Review of Books is quarterly. And we're engaged in all kinds of arguments, mostly on the political right, as to what's going on right now and what we should do. And our mission in this is to bring, again, those principles of American government that are really based on the principles of Western civilization to bear on contemporary political problems. And so lastly, excuse me, and more importantly than anything else, is we educate. And so our work is based on 40 years of scholarship in the academy. Of course, it's harder and harder for people to study and talk about these things in higher education today. So we bring together a lot of young elite leaders to Claremont, to California, to educate them, people who are already out there and moving and mid-career, or people who are in their first or second job in politics and culture and in important positions. And we teach them about what we think is important as far as the principles and purpose of government. So I've been here about a year. I went to grad school here, did a lot of other things in between, but I ended up coming back because under the new president, Ryan Williams, we're expanding, and I think we're playing a role in the conversation unfolding nationally right now.
And before that, your background is the very foundational Great Books program at Thomas Aquinas College. So you understand the importance of imbibing the great minds of the past and how their wisdom is still perennial.
Absolutely. In fact, I converted at Thomas Aquinas College. I became a Catholic there senior year. And that experience obviously profoundly impacted my life. Not just in the faith, but it's an intellectual formation, right? That's what led to my conversion. So, so that's where the journey begins. And then after that, I went to grad school in political science at Claremont. But then I went in. I did political consulting. I did some media work. I evaluated teaching American history grants. There were grants given nationally by the Department of Education, supposedly to help people understand American history. And a number of other things along the way. And then I taught. I taught at Loyola Marymount, Claremont McKenna College, the School of Public Policy at Pepperdine, and before coming here. Yep.
There's 8 different ways I could launch up what you just said. Let me let's press fast forward a little bit and talk about the event with Mike Pompeo in L.A., Secretary of State, who spoke at your 40th anniversary gala. Because you were not permitted to run ads for that event.
Yes.
Our superiors at Google deemed that to be beyond the pale.
Yeah, and the reason why is what's most outrageous, right? I mean, first off, as you know, the big problem here from the get-go is they don't give you any information about how their process works. So we don't know exactly how this happened, but either an algorithm or an employee at Google decided that we couldn't run ads. And for the listeners, the way this works when you run advertisement with Google is you can take a website and say, I want all the people who visit that website to then to then have this advertisement placed in front of their eyes. And that's Google's power, and that's where its money comes from. It can do this for you. So we said, look, everyone reading The American Mind, AmericanMind.org, they're all going to be people who might want to go to the 40th anniversary gala with Victor Davis Hanson as the MC and Pompeo speaking. So we'll advertise to them, and we get this message, and it says, I'm sorry, we can't advertise to people on that site. And the reason they gave was because they said the site, AmericanMind.org, which I am the founding editor and creator of, was racially or ethnically orientated.
Yes.
Now, the reason they have that rule, right, is so that they can't be creepy Google, even though they are. They can't be creepy Google. They don't want to follow people online, for instance, because they go to BET, right, or Ebony or something like that, and all of a sudden say, well, now I'm advertising just to people who are black. They want to stay out of that game, right? And so that's why they have the rule, which is somewhat understandable. But the problem is, how in the heck is AmericanMind.org a racially oriented site?
I can guess.
Yeah.
Because you're opposed to racial group identity, all those SJW identity markers. You're opposed to that. So when you discuss it, our superiors think it does not compute. These people seem like KKK.
Yeah. Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah.
That's precisely what happened. We have a number of essays talking about multiculturalism, and by that we don't mean many cultures coming together in harmony. We mean a philosophic movement, the philosophic movement behind identity politics and political correctness, which is really, in many ways, pushing a kind of separatism and denying the equality we should all have as citizens, rather than as racial groups. So. Exactly. We were arguing against treating people based on race in politics, right? We were arguing against racially based group politics. And because we were arguing against racially based group politics, someone at Google, either an algorithm or a person, thought that we were racially oriented content. Now, I mean, the implication would be that it was some kind of content geared for whites, I suppose, for white people, which is disturbing and really just revolting when you think about we're making an argument based on the principles of the Declaration that all human beings are created equal, and yet this gets deemed racially oriented content, and therefore we can't advertise the event. Now, just ahead, I should say, in our case, within less than 24 hours of going public, our network is such that Google called up our president, Ryan Williams, and said, oh, you know what, we're really sorry. We're a big company. Mistakes were made. You can advertise.
That's the pattern. I've been soft banned by Twitter. Twitter took away half my followers in one fell swoop. Many of my tweets are not retweetable. And I have no way of knowing, Matthew, and this applies to probably the Claremont Institute and you and everyone listening, you don't know if you have 5,000 Twitter followers and you tweet something, you don't know if 14 people read it or all 5,000.
Yes.
They have ways of severing the tie between the creator and his intended audience. Also, I have a feeling this very interview will also be demonetized from YouTube. Every time I go after something remotely related to the upcoming 2020 election, if conservative ideas are given a fair platform, and we have a conversation about the things we're not talking about. Yeah. If I interview anyone on abortion, abortion recovery, pornography, transgenderism, and let me disguise it so the bot won't hear it properly. Schmomo-schmexual behavior, schmansgenderism. Instantly, I get an email, often within hours, from YouTube, just to pick on YouTube for a second. Your video has been manually reviewed and is deemed not suitable for all advertisers.
Yeah.
That's it. There's no human being that writes it. It's just, your friendly neighborhood Google team. So you're always fighting this anonymous big tech entity, and unless enough shame is cast upon them, they stonewall until they finally cough up, oops, Sawi. I think they should just call it the oops Sawi and spell it SAWWY.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there, and it's important though in what you're saying for everyone to realize, right? There is no process that we're aware of. So the mind, the imagination starts to wander, right? We have no idea how these decisions are being made, no idea. Mm-hmm. And so if you are targeted, you start to think, some pretty dark thoughts about what's going on behind the curtain. Yeah. And we have a way of knowing, what they're doing and whether it's true or not. I mean, we don't know, and they don't have to tell us right now. I don't think that's a sustainable situation, though.
Mm-hmm. And the decisions affecting so many are in the hands of so few. I'm not sure if you watched the interview on Joe Rogan between Tim Pool and Jack Dorsey, and Jack's, I forget her name, this Indian attorney. The Indian attorney there told Tim Pool to his face she didn't understand what the phrase liberal meant. Right. And Jack Dorsey's just kind of burbling. He's kind of, with all due respect, a weird dude. He didn't seem to care at all that censorship on the Twitter platform is almost entirely throwing shade against conservative ideas, whereas leftists are free to spew all kinds of things with lots of potty words. I mean, I run a PG-13 feed, so I'm not into F-bombs, but when certain ideas are called beyond the pale and it's so consistent, you have to see a pattern. So it's maddening when that pattern is even denied by the people who are adjudicating it.
Yeah. And now, on the other hand, I do think that, and I know that you're part of this, I do think that many people are starting to band together and complain, and certainly people who lean to the right have an understanding that this is a problem, and that understanding is growing. And you see this in terms of politicians. I was able to talk to Ted Cruz at an event not long ago. He seemed very cognizant of this. He's speaking out about it more. You see it with Senator Hawley, and you see it with another number of people that actually would be surprising, right? I mean, more and more people realize it's a problem. I still don't think, however, that enough people realize what is at stake. Because what is at stake is it's more than this phrase free speech we kick around, which we should talk about a little bit. I mean, we've never had free speech. Doesn't mean everyone can say whatever they want. It's never really meant that in America, but it has meant that when it comes to political discourse and political opinions, we like to keep that free, right? And the question is, how do you apply free speech to digital media? But what's at stake here is nothing less than control over the entire conversation. And really, in a way, our minds have been opened, I think, by the rise of digital technology, because let's be honest, the conversation was heavily controlled in the age of TV, right? I was
going to ask you about that. Yeah.
Isn't it laughable now to think that there was a half-hour news show, and at the end of it, Walter Cronkite said, "And that's the way it is." Everyone today would laugh. A prepackaged video show in half an hour is not going to tell you the way it is. It's going to have all kinds of bias, et cetera, right? And so I think that what we're seeing is the transition to digital has opened up a lot of people's minds when they realize, like, wait a minute, this is now being controlled in the same way that TV was controlled. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense to you or ring true?
Yeah, it does. It's sort of paradoxical because we can't go back to the good old days of Walter Cronkite, because it was really dominated by three: CBS, ABC, and the DuPont network, Dumont network in the 50s and 60s. And all events in American society were filtered through a similarly very small number of people who interpreted those events and had their own biases and so on. And for sure, a similar degree or a similar kind of censorship in the sense of controlling the grand narrative was going on. In a way, it's healthier because of the invention of the modem and what Matt Drudge did rather quickly with that invention, with the Drudge Report. Now, the good news is everybody's Walter Cronkite. You don't have to go through that editorial filtration to get your story out. The bad news is everybody's Walter Cronkite, so it becomes a discernment question. How do you wade through the morass of everybody creating content? And so I agree with, and I want to mention something that you wrote in Real Clear Politics with Harmeet Dillon, banding together against big tech. The answer isn't to say, hey, conservatives, go build your own Twitter. Make your own damn Facebook. So to just kind of dig into that a little bit, why is that not an answer to the crisis?
So this is if there's people out there listening who their hackles all of a sudden went up, like, wait a minute, are you guys talking about being against the free market or whatever? I would just ask you to be open-minded with what I'm about to say, and think about it over time, because there's a big debate that's happening now on the right about the role of economics in political life, the role of economics, morality, and government. And I think everyone on all sides is going to be challenged to rethink a little bit the way that they've thought about it for the last 40, 50 years. So the problem with people saying, well, they're private companies, go build your own Google, is because you can't. Right? I mean, first off, you can't. That's not gonna happen. Why? Well, for starters, with Google, it's insanely hard to become the next Colossus in general, right? Even the biggest, free market entrepreneurship, it's really hard to create a monopoly. But when something is a monopoly, and make no mistake, Google is a monopoly on search. Google controls the world's access to information, and they have the search engine that everybody uses. If you don't believe me, go talk to Peter Thiel in his book 0 to 1. He talks about this. I mean, they are a monopoly. They pretend to be other things, and they're a monopoly because they have the search engine. Now, if you try to compete with them, they're going to use government regulation, which they've used to get to the point at which they're at now, right? Where their lobbyists have shaped the law to benefit them, and they're going to buy you out. I mean, they're going to do everything they can to destroy you. So first off, it's not very practical. Like you can't just go create something that's that large when they already are in collusion with the government. In fact, Mark Zuckerberg, right, wants the government to regulate him, so they can just become pals and he can just continue making money. Mm-hmm. So this isn't a kind of we don't have lemonade stands here, and you don't like the lemonade over here, so you build your own. I mean, that's just not the scene. That's not realistic. But probably more importantly is this issue of free speech and public discourse as a necessary part of American political life. So number one, it's a monopoly. You can't just go build your own. Number two, we're talking about your access to speak to everybody else in society. And we're talking about who controls that. And in Google's case, you're talking about who controls the way in which you see the world. So in other words, they already have a political role, and they're shaping the political landscape in a way that's very serious. Does that make any sense? Yeah, it does.
Control is the operative word. And and just back to the let's say high improbability that someone's going to come up with a conservative alternative to Google. Another quasi-colossus by the name of Microsoft tried, but nobody says Bing it, right?
Right.
It's just
no. And the idea is, look, the answer to a problem that you have with something a corporation's doing that you think is immoral or just bad business, right? You don't like the way they run their business. The answer is not merely to go start your business. You have lots of other things you could do from a free market perspective to say, hey, I don't like this, we don't like this, and we're going to put pressure on you to change your practices. And that's what Harmeet and I proposed. We said, look, regardless of what should happen with the law and government and regulation, there's a lot of regulations on the book that aren't being enforced right now when it comes to these companies, by the way. But regardless of that, we need people to band together as a group and put political pressure on these companies to say, hey, change your practices. We don't like this, right? And if we band people together as a group, then all of a sudden there'll be power in that in many ways, because there's many ways to put pressure on them. And I fail to see why anyone would oppose that, because it's an inherently free market solution. Consumers have always banded together to put pressure on companies when they do things they don't like. And I think that's something that that has a lot of traction these days, and we'll be doing a lot more along these lines in the coming months.
I think the banding together is great because users are also customers, and Mark Zuckerberg et al. They're not missionaries; they're capitalists, and they will listen if the numbers reach a critical mass of people who are just saying no. Look at CrossFit. You mentioned CrossFit just saying, "Hey, Facebook, you're not all that. We don't like our private groups being deleted." And then we have to fight this anonymous, them. So they quit. What do you think about the just quitting option?
I mean, the just quitting option can be good. I don't think if people don't band together, however, and do it at once, I don't know that it will have an impact. It would take a lot of people over a long period of time dropping out in order for that to have an effect. But nonetheless, I mean, they do pay attention to to CrossFit saying, no, we're not going to use Facebook anymore because you're randomly banning our groups and we don't even know why. That's a good thing, but we have to understand they still have a monopoly. So YouTube is a great example. Forget about ideology, right? Forget about what being persecuted because of your ideas. Mm-hmm. There's a ton of people on YouTube for years who've been upset with YouTube simply because they gouge you, right? They take their cut of whatever you make, and people feel like I'm being unfairly taxed. I wish there was another platform where, I got more than money from advertising myself, right? YouTube, the way they do it is it's good for them, but it's not good for us. In other words, there's been a lot of people who had economic interest to leave YouTube, and they talk about it, and some of them have tried it, but it's never worked because YouTube does have the monopoly. Everyone feels like they have to be on there, especially when it comes to advertising. So look, any group is still going to need these platforms, at least for now, to be financially viable and to have a say in the public square. So I think that people talk about leaving, they want to leave, but you know what? It's the same problem as with boycotts, right? I mean, people might be upset at Target, but how many people are really going to say, I'm not going to go to Target? People might be upset at Disney, but Disney is such a big company and they control so much, right? Is it really realistic for everyone to go and leave? Now, don't get me wrong. Such boycotts can be effective, but they're going to take a lot of organization, and they take a kind of focus for people to take a baby step and to make a statement politically. And for that, we need more political organization, if that makes any sense. So,
and a sustained effort, a sustained focus. You can get all ticked off on a Tuesday, but if by the following Tuesday you've dropped the ball, then companies like Target double down because they're counting on your laziness or the fact that you've drifted off to the next disturbing shiny metal object. And Rahim Kassam points out, the global editor-in-chief of Human Events, not everybody has. I mean, I have a podcast. I do have a platform. I have a membership site with members in 5 countries. Most people don't have that. So they're just, Joe Q, ordinary person living their life without any kind of bullhorn or platform. So they're even smaller fish for the decision makers.
That's why the go start your own Google is so ridiculous. I mean, no, you can't just go start your own Google if you're most people. You can't even publicly complain and get a response from the company when they ban or censor you, and that's why banding together is so important. So in Rahim's case, right, here's a guy who I know, he's one of our fellows. He says controversial things all the time, not all of which I agree with. But in this case, they banned him because he had a Facebook post in 2008, an 11-year-old Facebook post. Somehow our overlords found, and it simply said that men can't be women. Boop, gone.
Oh, great. See, you just said that. Now this is going to be banned too. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm here for. Controversy.
Yeah, they do. I see a lot of this dredging up old tweets and things that, as you point out in the article, were agreed to by tens of billions of people throughout human history. All of a sudden now, that little phrase, men can't be women, is beyond the pale.
And this is why this is such an important issue. It's not just a question of economics. We have an unfair balance here, right? On the one hand, you have all the users who go on and, they do get to use this free, quote unquote, but it's not really free because the company is trading off their data. That's how it makes money. So you have this trade-off with the company, and you go and you say your piece. But it's you versus the company who now has pressure from pretty much all the political and cultural elites in our country to prevent something like the 2016 election from happening again, right? And they all kind of think the same way. And there's an incredible amount of cultural and political pressure on them to squeeze out any kind of, anything that goes against the groupthink, as we know, that the elites all espouse. And so the people who are putting pressure on them are incredibly powerful. And they think very differently from the rest of the country. And they're all on one side, right? And over here, you have all the users. And that's why we think ultimately the banding together is important, because there will be power in numbers, but you're not going to defeat, you're not going to have Joe the plumber be able to take on the tech overlords with their friends in regulation, all their lawyers and their cultural elites who are on their side. And so you have this weird problem at the tech companies where some of them really believe that they're still, they have a free platform and they're doing good for the world. They're not all ideologues, we should say that. They hire a lot of conservatives to be their schmoozers because they know conservatives are the ones, people on the right are the ones who are most upset. So they'll hire people who are then their job is to go and tell you, Patrick, it was just a mistake. Everything's fine, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. That's why the Lenin phrase "useful idiot" has nothing to do with politics, left or right. Some people are willing for a buck to be the apologist for and to enable the indefensible.
Oh yeah, and I think also it's important to realize they're not all ideologically woke bots. A lot of them are just kind of ignorant and apolitical. I think like Jack and some of these people, I don't know what goes on in their head. I mean, some of them are insanely liberal, but a lot of them seem to be just very confused about American principles and purpose, and they're in a very strange place with pressure on all sides. But again, if we don't put the pressure on them that's needed to change, they're going to move in one direction, and we know what that direction is.
And this doesn't apply only to principled conservatives. Look at what happened to feminist Meghan Murphy, banned from Twitter for what you call the secular sin of dead naming. She simply used the wrong pronoun. I mean, this is how my conversation with Jordan Peterson began almost 3 years ago. He was really unknown. He was fighting craziness on the campus of the University of Toronto, and now this has become the cause du jour. Matt, do you sense a kind of cognitive dissonance among people like Meghan Murphy? They've got to be thinking, wait a second, I thought I was on the approved opinion list. And do you think that people are slowly swallowing the jagged red pill? That the free speech threats and the fact that big tech monopolizes the control of ideas and the nature and rules of the conversation, that maybe they have to rethink their own foundations, as Dave Rubin did?
Yeah, I do think that there's something to what you say. That is happening. You have people who consider themselves liberals in the old sense. They tell everyone I'm for free speech and real discourse, and there's a lot of people who actually mean that. For instance, it's the same problem you see at the universities. There's a lot of old school liberal professors who, and I rail on professors all the time. I know that game. But there's a lot of old school liberal professors who are actually much better than the young woke administrators who would actually be okay with, an opposing viewpoint coming on campus. And so you see that in the culture at large as well, when you see feminists getting banned for saying, saying things that are wrong in this ever-changing list of what's okay and what's not, what's blasphemy and what's not for the woke gods. So people are getting upset with it, but they face the same problem the professors do in the academy, which is that even if they're okay with quote-unquote free speech, they're not the ones in charge, and they're scared. They're scared for the same reason everyone else is scared. And for them, in a way, it's even scarier because they're more closely tied to the people who are all about censorship, banning, and basically unpersoning anyone in the public square who disagrees. So they almost have the tiger by the tail there. So they're close to these people. They don't agree with them, but it's very hard for them to say anything in today's political environment. And but I agree with you. I do think there's a lot of people who, at least quietly, don't like this, and because who does? Who wants to live in fear every second of the day that something they said in the past or something they're going to say, 5 minutes from now in another 5 minutes will be considered blasphemy, and they'll be unpersoned and gutted in front of everyone and just destroyed in the public square. No one wants that. But the atmosphere of fear is real. So they're scared.
Mm-hmm. I think the classic liberal example of what you're talking about is the late Nate Hentoff, the Jewish atheist, pro-lifer, wrote a book called Free Speech for Me, but Not for Thee.
Right.
I think that nails it.
Yes, it does. Now, on the other hand, I want to say something. My job is to always make people feel a little bit uncomfortable. That's my job.
Hashtag embrace the awkward. Fire away.
Yes. So conservatives have doubled down on free speech on campus and in terms of arguing against the tech companies. And to a large extent, I agree with that. That's good. We should debate on the basis of free speech. We should use that principle as something that allows us to say what we want to say. But free speech and this kind of libertarian notion of, and some of my best friends are libertarians, but this libertarian notion that we should be able to free to say whatever we want, that's actually not the notion of free speech that's in the First Amendment and is part of Anglo-American tradition in the first 300 years on this continent. Recently, we might remember, some of us, the Supreme Court changed free speech doctrine so that now it defends everything, right? If you're old enough, you remember when the Supreme Court was saying, well, actually, free expression is free speech, and you, small town, can't ban strippers in your community, right? So, in other words, free speech was always limited by its purpose. And I think that if we just make free speech arguments, that's actually not good enough. We need to go deeper and make arguments about what the purpose of speech is. So free speech argument would say, for instance, on campus, they should allow anyone they want to come in and say whatever they want. And that's actually not true. If you're at college, you don't want just anyone coming in and saying stuff to piss people off. You want something that probably promotes a kind of intellectual back and forth, right? And that's okay. And that's what we should be arguing for. Like, look, you should have the speaker come in because they're contributing to the mission of the university. Similarly, when it comes to political speech, I don't think any of us would disagree. There are people who should probably be banned who are posting, terrible videos of violence or sexuality, right, on these platforms that no one we all say is outside the bounds of what should be allowed. There are kinds of speech, for instance, blasphemy laws, actual blasphemy laws that are based on Christianity that have been part of American practice for centuries. So our argument needs to be refined a little bit. It's not just free speech. It's free speech for legitimate purposes. Yeah. And there's a great book by Father Francis Canavan that we're going to reprint this year. And I think it's called Free Expression, Purpose as Limit. So the purpose of speech limited it. And Father Francis Canavan was a great Catholic, great intellectual. And his point was, I think he wrote it in 1985, and we'll reprint it because we need it now. His point was, make free speech arguments, but be sure you base them on the purpose of the speech.
Yeah, beneath all of this is a broader conversation about what the word freedom means. I'm a spiritual son of the Venerable Fulton Sheen, who wrote famously that freedom to do what you want, that's license, which is another form of slavery.
Yes.
And freedom to do what you have to do, well, that's communism. That's totalitarianism. Freedom has to be rooted in what you ought to do. And so there's no such thing as free speech in a vacuum. Speech about what and why. Everybody, the classic example, you can't say fire in a crowded theater and so on. And this leads to a question about the definition of free speech, because all free speech is subject to some kind of dilution or limitation. I was very privileged to interview Dr. Bernard Nathanson before he passed away, and he endorsed my book on contraception because he thought that was one of the main taproots of the abortion movement. And his point, even when he was still an atheist pro-lifer, was that this woman's right to her own body, we don't think that way in terms of injecting drugs into her body. We have prostitution laws. Well, why isn't that an interference of the right of the woman to do with her own body? Well, that's because individual personal rights and freedoms have a limit, and that's what we're debating, what the limit of that is. But I agree about the libertarian notion of free speech is one of the reasons why I think libertarianism is the philosophy for people who have no kids. It's just, just hyper individualistic that doesn't cohere not only with natural law, but with the ideals of the founders of this country. So can we just hit that, because I know that's close to the mission of the Claremont Institute. Did the framers of the Constitution and on the first generation of Americans, did they envision an ACLU style America where it's a moral chaos world run by relativists? How important was a worldview, at least of deism, of some sense of transcendent?
So this is an incredibly important topic, and I'm very glad you brought it up. In a way, this is a Catholic intellectual moment on the right. There's a moment here where I think that we have something to say, and if I could sum it up, it's that the founders were not libertarian liberals. They didn't think that government just protected an ever-changing catalog of individual rights that government creates and then protects and defends, and that ultimately the goal of government was simply freedom to do whatever you want. They rejected that idea. They believed in natural rights, which were ordered by the purpose and the form of human nature. So government was there to protect natural rights, but it was also, the Constitution itself was designed and created to prevent what they called licentiousness, which you hit on earlier. Noah Webster creates the first American dictionary in 1806, and licentiousness is defined by the absence of just restraint. In other words, justice is supposed to order liberty. And so if you remember, some of you may have had the privilege of reading the Federalist Papers at some time in your life. They don't read them much anymore in K through 12, but the Federalist Papers make this very clear in a very famous passage that says justice is the end of government, and liberty will be lost in the pursuit of justice. People will give up liberty for the sake of what they think is just, and justice is the end. So their notion of freedom from the very beginning, they say, look, justice or freedom. They said freedom or liberty can go either way. And there's tons of I spent a long time reading the ratification debates when they argued over whether or not to adopt the Constitution. And they make this distinction over and over and over again, that liberty that's abused, that's licentiousness, to freedom to do whatever you want, that will lead to tyranny. That will lead, in fact, to slavery. And I can read you something that sums it up beautifully. So the Constitution's preamble, one of the last thing it lists when it lists its purposes, form a more perfect union, right? Establish justice. The last thing it lists is the blessings of liberty. So for sure, right, one of the purposes of American government is to give us the blessings of liberty. But do we know what that meant? Right? We tend to think now, especially in the last 50 years, we've adopted this notion that it meant, everyone's free to do whatever they want. And that's not the case. And there's an official document that I'll read to you that comes from Virginia. The Bill of Rights in 1776 in Virginia said this: no free government or the blessings of liberty. So the blessings of liberty can't be preserved to any people, but only by a firm adherence to justice, moderation, temperance, frugality, and virtue, and by a firm recurrence to fundamental principles. That's their understanding of liberty. That's
astounding, because to the modern ear, that sounds like you just quoted from St. Pius X, as opposed to, vaguely Protestant deists from 250 years ago. Amazing.
Right. So Jefferson, Jefferson is a good example of this. I mean, he's one of the most modern of them. A lot of them were just straight up, Protestant Christians. But Jefferson is the most, modern of them, and he doesn't believe in the miracles in the Bible. But he still thinks that the University of Virginia will fund a professor of ethics who will teach proofs for the existence of God and the reasonableness of the virtues, and he thinks the classical virtues overlap with Christian virtues. Christ was a great moral teacher, just didn't like the miracles, right?
Yeah.
So even the most modern of them, they had an understanding of human nature in which liberty was good, because it was used to internally, fulfill the happiness of human nature, and they thought reason and revelation roughly agreed on the human nature. The problem is, of course, today, is that we have a radical disagreement about what human nature is, and therefore what liberty is.
According to you. That was a joke. Something that you said jumped out at me, and it may have jumped out at other viewers and listeners, and that is justice is the end of government. Nowadays, we're not accustomed to thinking in terms of teleology and the purposes of things. That's the sense in which you mean the end, right? Because I wonder if someone went, what? Is government going to be over because of justice? What is meant by the end? It's a very key concept.
Yeah, so it's what the point is. It's what you're aiming at. And what justice really means is how we order the parts of ourselves within ourselves in a way that leads to good and our happiness. And in terms of society, justice means how we order ourselves in relationship to each other so that we actually attain some kind of good in common that's really good for all of us together. And here's the problem, right? The problem is a lot of people on the right, I sense a lot of conservative Catholics, for instance, makes them a little nervous to hear this language in contemporary politics. And the reason why, I think, is because they see that the left has used the language of social justice for a long time, right? Mm. Where they hear the common good and they think, well, I'm a conservative. I hear the common good. I protect my wallet, right?
Common good. That's German for Karl Marx.
Right. You must be a Marxist. And were the founders Marxists? I don't think so. So we've lost the traditional language and understanding of the purpose or end of government. So when I say justice is the end of government, that means government ultimately wants to make sure that we're all related to each other in a way that leads to our good and happiness. That does not mean that all of a sudden I support the Great Society or that I support tyrannical government overreach any more than the founders of this country did. Mm-hmm. But it does mean that if you just think the end is freedom and you're simply anti anything government and you think it's inherently evil, first off, you're not going to win in politics. That's what's happened to the right over the last few decades if you don't have some positive agenda. Mm-hmm. But you're denying the reality of the tradition of Western civilization, which says, no, we want to prevent government from being tyrannical, but the goal of it is still to help people, right? And it may not help people by redistributing everyone's wealth, for instance, but its goal is still to help people. Mm-hmm. And, mm-hmm. If you go around and say, well, my political platform is government can never help people and it's always bad. Well, don't be surprised when you mm-hmm. lose.
Eat the poor, Jonathan Swift.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm not sure if the Claremont reviewer, the book review folks have seen Timothy Gordon's book, Catholic Republic, Why America Will Perish Without Rome. It's a very provocative thesis, and it goes to the heart of what we're now talking about. Because I think a lot of, speaking of making some people uncomfortable, Protestant conservatives listening right now might not want to hear this, but our Lord Jesus Christ did not promise the Holy Spirit to be with the United States, but rather to the church. Do you think that a lot of conservatives buy into a kind of what Leo XIII called the Americanist heresy, as though America and her secularist ideals are the equivalent of the gospel, or somehow America is quasi-eternal? Because a lot of people think that that American conservatism is the same as Christianity.
Yeah, so clearly, and I think the founders are actually pretty good on this themselves. I mean, if anyone thought that any government is going to last forever or has the keys to eternal life, right, they would misunderstand the core of Christianity. And there's always a temptation to unite church and state in our minds as one glorious thing. I think in any culture, in any society, under any government, people are tempted to equate the eternal and divine with their government. In fact, in a way, Christianity, this sounds paradoxical coming from a Catholic, but in a way, Christianity at a radical level separates church and state, because in the old pagan societies, the gods of the city and the city were the same thing. There was no separation, whereas Christ says there's another kingdom that's not of this world. And therefore, even though human governance should be ordered the right way towards the highest ends and goods of man, it's not the same, right? And so I think there's certainly been some of that in American history, but I don't know. I'm not as worried about that as the other extreme these days, because I think that many people have adopted a kind of modern cynical stance where all government sucks, it's all terrible, America's terrible, there's nothing good about it. It's not constant. On the right, it's right-leaning young intellectuals will say it's not consonant with the principles of the Catholic Church. It was all heresy and it's all evil. And then on the left, you have people, it's not consonant with the woke gods and it was always racist, right? Yeah. And so I think we need to focus on what the principles of it are. And I think that's what's most important. I'm not as worried when I look at the contemporary political scene about people, idolizing America. Now, having said that, one thing that I do think is important, and that is we have to be careful about what we think American principles are. And there we do see some real problems. When we think that economic policy, for instance, is not prudential, it always has to be one way and not another way. You need to radically rethink that, right? When you start thinking that various policies in politics are eternal verities, that's always a problem, right? Yeah. And so we need to be careful. We need to be careful to distinguish, I guess, what is opinion, what we can disagree about given the circumstances, and then what's an actual political principle that should last.
Do you think that there's a role for lawfare for conservatives to just up and out sue people like Google and Twitter? I know Harmeet Dillon has been involved in suits like that because they respond to that too. It's a form of, to use a hockey analogy, it's a cross-check back. Oh
yeah. So Harmeet has sued Google and Twitter. She's done great work there. She is actively engaged in this, and she would tell you, look, there's all kinds of existing laws that need to be applied to these companies. And in general, I think the right is correct to pursue that avenue. And then I think there's even deeper ways in which a lot of these organizations do need to be, I'll say, threatened, with the force of politics. And I do believe we've been too nice in the past. The right has not really been playing in a serious way like the left does.
100% agree. Yeah.
And, that I would want it to be constitutional, of course, or within the bounds of the law. But within the bounds of the law, we should be fighting tooth and nail. Absolutely.
Most aren't. Most are listening to Perry Como in the hammock in the backyard. Someone's going to take care of it. It's always someone else. There's a little paradox here about social media because here we are rightly complaining about the big tech monopolies, and yet you could say that let's say pre-2001, maybe late 90s, minus Twitter and so on, Donald Trump may not have been electable. His leveraging, let's just start with his Twitter feed, is a main reason why he was able to go around the ABC, alphabet cable outlets and speak directly to people around the elite controllers of the narrative. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that's part and parcel of his rise, and I think we've talked about Marshall McLuhan before, kind of the deeper philosophy of media. I mean, I think the deeper magic for Trump is not just that he was able to use a Twitter feed, which got him on the news whenever he wanted, right? He just manipulated the TV news cycle because he'd just tweet something that was outside the bounds, and they felt like they needed to report on it, and then he'd be on TV again. His message would get out. So he used Twitter directly to get around the old media. But I think there's an even deeper aspect to this, which is that people increasingly realized how constructed televisual media was. They realized increasingly, and they were increasingly angry about it, how biased the media was, to use the word most people use. And you could see this in politics over the course of the last 15, 20 years, where as soon as someone stood up against the old media, right, their popularity would skyrocket. And you see it in terms of people who are famous today. I mean, obviously Matt Drudge, you mentioned earlier, but anyone who fought the old media would skyrocket in popularity. I mean, Breitbart, there's a whole, still, even long after his death, there's an entire website that has tons of people going to it, still one of the top ranked websites on the right. But Ben Shapiro, right, all these figures, as soon as you stood up against the old media, in the old entertainment system, you became popular because people, as the digital age arose and people had ways to obtain information around that medium, they started to realize how pernicious it was and how it was actually manipulating or influencing their minds.
The left never seems to learn their lesson about going too far. They always seem to push it too far, and the game is exposed. Most Americans do not agree with the black-robed attorneys called Supreme Court justices that marriage can be redefined at will, just with a flick of the pen. Most Americans do not agree that the gender dysphoria that's suffered by people less than half of 1% should control the narrative of what thoughts are permitted and what decisions are made on things like pronouns. And they always seem to go too far. So now we have the trans stuff with drag queens reading to preschoolers in public libraries. Most people go, no way, that's just too much. And I think this explains why Donald Trump's Twitter feed has not been deleted. Because if Matt Peterson or Patrick Coffin said the things that Trump says every day, we would be gone. It wouldn't even be an article. It wouldn't be a thing. But if they were consistent in applying their rules and they deleted Donald Trump, they know what would happen. They would reap the whirlwind. People would be outraged because this is obviously censorship in a nakedly biased political way. Does that make sense? Do you think that's why Trump is safe from censorship?
Oh yeah, I mean, in a way, he had money, but he also had, probably even more importantly, he had fame, for a long time before all of a sudden he becomes the bad guy. Remember, he wasn't necessarily the bad guy at all until he just refused to bow down to any complaints about political correctness, etc. Is it almost didn't matter what he said. It's the fact that he stood up against it. And people saw he really couldn't be silenced because, once he started to build steam in the campaign, even back in 2016, there was nothing that could be done. So yeah, I think you're right. And that's why the hatred against Trump and why he becomes, kind of a symbol. Because I think there's plenty of people who voted for him, religious folks who, they weren't voting for him as a person. They were voting for him in context as the best option they had and someone who, the best analogy I heard was when you hire kind of a bad guy to defend you in the Western town, I think a lot of people regarded him that way. And he was a symbol just because he wouldn't bow down. And people gravitated towards that. And you're right. He's at the point now where it'd be very hard for him to ban. But what you see, I mean, it would cause World War III. There's no way they're going to do that. But what you do see is they're trying to figure out what can they get rid of, right? How far can they go? And you've talked about this before. I mean, they're slowly pushing and trying to see, how far they can get. And I don't think it's not a big conspiracy. They're confused as well about what's going on, but they are pushing to see how far they can go in shaping speech. And remember, there's an enormous problem in our society and in political thought on the right where people don't realize or we downplay the impact of media and we say, oh, well, it's all just neutral entertainment, when in fact it forms the way we think about everything, right? And so the worst part of all censorship and bias is what you don't see, right? When you don't even know what they've shaped and all you see is what's in your feed and what you don't know is what kills you. And that starts to form your mind in ways that you're not aware of, right? And that's what's at stake right now.
Look what Mr. Dorsey and friends choose what is trending. I mean, I have no interest in 99.9% of the things that are hashtag this and that. It's like, are you kidding? Some blockbuster thing will happen in the Catholic Church that affects at least 1 billion people, and it's crickets inside the Twitter world. Right. I mean, that's manufactured consent, to use
Google's
Chomsky's word.
Right, I mean,
what's that?
Google's front page is a great example, the homepage. I mean, stuff they put up there is often obscure, but there's also obvious popular things that maybe are religious in some way they could put up there that they never will. And it's astounding how blind and often how just ignorant they are. I don't think we can't discount the fact that we just don't teach a lot in our schools. So a lot of people in the tech world, there's a lot they don't know, about religion, Western civilization, etc.
Yeah, why go to bigotry and hatred when you can start with ignorance?
Exactly.
Right.
Always the simplest. Answer.
That's I just cut myself on Occam's razor there. Just embarrassing. So AmericanMind.org and Claremont.org to connect with your thoughts and reviews and the goings on of the Claremont Institute. Final thoughts, observations, things you're really holding back?
Well, I think that it's really important for the audience to realize that there are increasingly going to be opportunities for them to do something about these problems. And I think in the past, people have been frustrated, but there was no way to channel that frustration. And what you see now, is increasing opportunity to debate how we should act politically, because it's all a mess. Everything's changing. It's a time to pay attention to what's going on, and you're going to see more and more opportunities like Harmeet and I present, where we say, look, banding together against big tech, follow along, sign up, we're going to start to lead. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's important for people to wake up again and pay attention to what's going on, because the last 40 years are going to be very, very different than what's about to happen. There's a lot of things that are going to move very fast in the next 10 years.
I think you're right. And I think in the crosshairs of that looming crisis is the role of our ability to have a public conversation about our hopes, our dreams, our political ideals. I'll just cite what you say here before you say join us. If we don't act together soon, we will lose our Republican form of government, which requires public debate and deliberation in order to survive. Citizens will live in fear, their heads down or their mouths shut, quote-unquote free, only to recite the compulsory platitudes of a new post-democratic regime. When you say join us, how can people join you?
They can go to AmericanMind.org, and if they look up this op-ed, Banding Together Against Big Tech, they can sign up there that's an email list that'll alert them to everything we're doing about big tech. And if you just follow us on AmericanMind.org, you'll see this as we move forward.
Okay, very good.
And I would say in general, I mean, don't give up hope. Don't be silent. This is now a time to be bold. And it really is. The environment really is changing in ways that I will continue to surprise people. Remember how surprising 2016 is. So prep yourself for what's going to happen. Just expect big, bold changes in politics, and keep your eyes and ears open and be hopeful. Don't give up.
You mentioned licentiousness. I just want to remind listeners, if they weren't aware, if they go to covenanteyes.com, this is a note to people who want to have an absolute porn-free home through social media devices, computers, tablets, smartphones. Covenanteyes.com. If you just put my name, Patrick, you get 30 days to test drive this fantastic. It's not just blocker software; it's accountability software. So, Covenant Eyes is not for people who want to reduce their porn use, but to have it go to zero for you and your family. Covenanteyes.com. Keyword Patrick. That's the coupon that gets you a month for free. Matthew Peterson, I've learned a ton. Thanks for your time, my friend. Appreciate it.
Thank you. It's great.
All right. This is the Patrick Coffin Show. Check out the website links at patrickcoffin.media. And in the meantime, be a saint. What else is there?
Hey, this is Patrick Coffin. If you like what you see and hear and you want to see and hear more, consider joining Coffin Nation as a full member. Just click right here and find out more about what that means. Nipsey, my fedora. That's Coffin Nation, the world's largest online community of culture builders. Click right here. See you on the inside.